So we had an old native in-house tool, and it was from the beginning times of Groupon when we built everything in-house bespoke. At one point, it had multiple engineers dedicated to it. And over the years, of course, it became more and more out of sync with the rest of the business. It required huge amounts of development, and well, it had a lot of bugs. It needed a lot of feature developments that were very, very difficult to get prioritized, because obviously if you go to any engineering org and you say, I want you to spend the next 3 months building something, because it will shave 6 seconds off the average handle time for a case, then if that's stacked against something that has a direct monetary impact, so something on the deal page, then it's probably not going to be prioritized. And it got to the point where I think it was about 5 years worth of development needed to be done to make the tool up to what we needed it to be doing in terms of the functionalities. It was essentially a very, very basic click-through decision tree with not much else added to it. And then the back end was an incredibly complex way of making the decision trees function, like going back to Windows 97 with folders and files and linking them, and they didn't speak to each other. It made sense, I suppose, 10 years ago, having a solution like that. And at the time, I suppose it was very forward thinking, but obviously Groupon has many, many things to be doing, and building a decision tree tool is probably not the best use of time. That's why after I looked at the kind of the future development list and the resources that were allocated to it, and it would have taken at least 5 years, I thought we can't afford to wait 5 years when we can just buy something. It was literally a Google search that started it, and it wasn't just Zingtree that I spoke with. I spoke with a couple of the other companies out there to just understand, like, there has to be a better tool out there that's, it has the functionalities already off the shelf. We don't need to develop them in-house. It's already integrated with our CRM, which is Salesforce. It can connect to our EDW. It has automation potential, all of these things that we didn't have. Zingtree was the company that stood above the competition head and shoulders, because it had not just the functionality we wanted, but functionalities we didn't even think existed or knew of. And the fact that it was a kind of a one-time engineering resource, like almost plug and play, you integrate it once and then no more engineering resources are needed, was a really, really big selling point for us, because internally we just don't have the engineering resources to maintain such a complex tool, and especially to build one from scratch. So we needed something that was industry leading with as little engineering resources required as possible. And that's what brought us to Zingtree. And then after we made the decision to purchase the agent-facing solution, it made sense as well. Well, if we can put these decision trees in front of agents, why can't we put them in front of merchants directly? And that's the biggest win that we'll hopefully see in the next few months as that integration continues, where we just figured, well, 90% of the time when you speak to Groupon merchant operations, the response is a template response. So why go to the hassle of having to speak to a human being for a template response when we can just give you the solution in the tree? Especially, other functionalities like the ability to read and write over Salesforce fields. That will be something we explore in the future. The ability to connect with other CRMs like Zendesk, because that's the tool our customer service teams use. We've already been sharing it with sales and marketing and teams throughout Groupon who have all of these problems that they can't think of solutions for. And we just say, okay, well, here's Zingtree. This is what it looks like. And there's, discussions happening throughout the company about expanding Zingtree outside of the world of support and into more commercial operations as well. Whilst we started small with Zingtree being just as a kind of agent-facing decision tree tool, it's going to become a self-service ecosystem, and I'm very confident it will continue to expand throughout the business, because the use case for decision tree functionality, it shouldn't be limited to support. It should be expanded to all organizations at scale who have complicated processes and policies to enact, and you need to ensure that there's that reliability of quality and standardization and accuracy that you struggle to get with any other solution. we rebuilt our decision trees from our old tool to our new tool. And that was across 13 countries with 3 or 4 lines of business across 8 languages. And I think it ended up being about 30 something trees and 10,000 plus nodes. So that was literally copying and pasting. The guy on my team, Greg, spent a couple of months rebuilding the old tree from the old, very clunky tool into the new tree, and we optimized it along the way. Then we had it ready to go, and then it was a case of the integration with Salesforce. But as soon as it was live, it was pretty seamless. We stopped using our old decision tree tool immediately, so we stopped updating it and needing to maintain that. And the time savings of that alone were massive, because you could update, something that would take minutes or hours, you could do it in seconds. Especially the fact that the trees can be linked and talk to each other, and you're not having to manually make every single update in every single tree all the time. We've very recently, in the last month, built a new report in Tableau for our QA team that we're starting to actively use Zingtree in our QA processes now. So we're now able to see the quality scores for agents who have used Zingtree versus haven't used Zingtree, and we'll be taking different actions depending on. So, for example, if you follow a process accurately and correctly and you haven't used Zingtree, that's fine. I mean, if it's a password reset, you probably know how to do that without going to a decision tree tool. But then conversely, if you mishandle a case and you didn't use the decision tree tool, then we're going to explore maybe mandating that you have to use the decision tree tool for a set period of time until your quality improves. And it also tells us in the most granular detail possible where agents struggle. What paths do agents kind of click around a bit too many times? Where do they have to go forwards and backwards? Why are they failing their quality scores? Historically, to get any kind of quality data involves manual audits. So each case had to manually go through this very complex form to see, have they done X, have they done Y, have they done Z? But of course, it only tells you the end result. With a manual QA process, you find out where it ended up, what the end result was, but you don't get to see the steps that were taken to get there. That was just a black hole. So the fact that we now have that level of visibility, you can see exactly what the agents are doing, exactly what the outcomes are, and then we'll start to expand that data to look at things like merchant satisfaction and case resolution time and number of touches and all the rest of the transactional fun stuff. So I'd say we're very early on in our journey of understanding the full potential of it from an agent perspective, and merchant facing is the even bigger potential that we'll be launching probably sometime in Q3. That's when we get to see the same type of insights from merchants, like what are the merchants asking? What are they looking at? What are they searching for? At the moment, we do have a kind of support ecosystem, shall we call it, within our merchant center, but it's FAQs. You have to read an FAQ, and if the FAQ doesn't answer your question, you have to speak to somebody. And I think FAQs, great in 1999. And I think they probably made sense as a self-service solution back then. But in 2022, I don't think an FAQ is a solution. I don't think being forced to read 5 paragraphs of text and then hoping it answers your question is the solution, versus really drilling down to understand exactly, first thing, who are you as a merchant? So are you a food merchant in Italy versus a beautician in Australia? Because you'll have very different needs as a merchant. So then giving tailored decision trees with tailored paths and tailored resolutions, and the ability to truly solve issues without ever needing to speak to a human. But proper resolutions, not just, you don't class that you've read the FAQ page as like you have solved your issue, but merchants able to actively make changes and actively kind of own their own relationship with Groupon. The aim is definitely not to make it harder to work with Groupon. It's very much the opposite. It's we want merchants to, wherever possible, be able to solve their own problems without needing to go to the stress and time of waiting for an email response or having to call, or even chat can take time if you've got a lot of typing. Ideally, it will be a click-through solution. You might need to put a couple of manual fields in, but it should be faster and better. And you should be more satisfied as a merchant that you've had that option. But It's not that we'll make it more difficult to speak to a human. Far from it. Ideally, it should be preferable to speaking to a human because you'll get the resolution faster yourself. There's multiple benefits we've seen. So historically, there were many processes that they had to exist in Google Docs because there was nowhere else to put them. If something required images or if something required anything complex, it just wouldn't work in the old decision tree tool. So one of the main benefits is that there's no Google Doc processes. There's no SOPs that exist in Google Docs anymore, because there were instances where you would QA a case and you would say, why has the agent done this? And it turns out, they were referencing a Word document that they'd saved on their desktop in 2015. That's the risk of not having a live and interactive tool like Zingtree, is people make copies of Google Docs to make their own copies that they can annotate and make suggestions with. But I think the biggest win by far is the ability to standardize those processes and remove and eliminate the deviation that practically eliminated now from a quality perspective. And they used to pop up all the time, left, right, and center, as many times as you email people to stop using Google Docs. If they've got it saved and people are used to using them, that's what they'll do. One of the big benefits that Zingtree's enabled as well is we've moved to a language-based approach for our support, away from a country-based approach. So, for example, we used to have UK, Ireland, UAE, and Australia as independent merchant operations teams. We've merged all of the international countries, and we will be merging the US in Q3 to that approach. And that's possible because Zingtree enables the ability to have multiple teams and countries merge, because the trees speak to each other. You can build one tree and then within those trees build in any deviations that may exist. Whilst you try and get to 100% standardization, there's always going to be different processes in UAE than Australia due to legal reasons or technical reasons, or there might be a tools difference. That's enabled us to move away from the kind of legacy approach and massively accelerate the move towards a language-based approach. We've just finished the first step of aligning the US to the international model. So before we merge them, we just need to ensure that the countries are following the same processes and policies. And it means that when we are ready to merge the teams, it's as simple as merging a Salesforce queue. Because the processes are already in Zingtree, it means that if you have an agent who's historically only worked for Groupon Australia, it's very, very easy for them to then transition to supporting 4 other markets, because the training's a couple of hours, whereas it used to be like a week per country. So you'd say, okay, Groupon Australia rep, we now need to support the UK because it's a backlog that was short-staffed or whatever. That was very complicated because you had very different processes, very different policies. But now it's a case of, okay, everything is in Zingtree. As long as you can use the tools, pretty much you can follow Zingtree. And it enables, like I said, it's not just the fact that it tells you what to do. It enables the ability to, for example, link out to PowerPoint if needed, or incorporate images. It's almost getting to the point where it effectively de-skills the role in a positive way. It means that you don't need to have 2 or 3 years of experience and training and practice and I remember how to do that particular process, because it is putting it where everything should be in Zingtree, and it's a kind of one-stop shop for everything. And it means that merchants get that better quality of service because they get the optimized and correct and accurate resolution. It means that 90% of the time they get the resolution in one touch. They shouldn't need to wait more than 12 hours for that response. And so I suppose another benefit, it's made things a lot simpler to do. Easy to change processes as well. I think the impact of change management is probably worth a mention. Because, for example, in the tool, you have the pop-up notification that tells you, like, we have just made a change, or, I don't know, there's floods in London, so something's going to happen there. So the ability to put some of the communications into the tool itself is also something, again, I'd say we're in the early discovery phase of how best to utilize that functionality, but the ability to kind of push information in front of agents is also really, really helpful and just removes the friction from change management. We've already built the entire, it's done, it's built, it's translated, it's ready to go. We're just queuing up the integration now between Zingtree and our merchant center engineers. And we're targeting over 50% of queries should be self-serviceable in the first version. But that's the kind of baseline that we're going to continue building on. And we do want to get to a position where almost any query can be resolved yourself without needing to speak to a human being, with chat and phone and email available if you can't find the answer, or if you want to speak on the phone. Because as we know, not everybody wants to click through a decision tree. So if somebody wants to call, they can. But the vision is to get to a place where it's effortless, where it's just common sense, it makes sense. You're not forced like the old-fashioned phone APIs where press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and it takes you 20 minutes to get anywhere. We want to get to a world where no more than 3 or 4 clicks and you get your answer, or you are able to request an update, or you're able to speak to somebody. You're able to basically get the answer in as short a time as possible and as fewer clicks as possible, with videos everywhere. So you don't want you to have to read a 1,000-word FAQ. We'd rather you watch a 30-second video. The same for some of our self-service tools that exist to create Groupon deals. Better to just show you a video of how to do it. A picture speaks 1,000 words, but videos, I think, speak even more. And that's what we're trying to, well, I think we have built. I think, it's a V1. I'm sure there will be learnings, but I'm really confident that the merchants who use our merchant center to speak with us will find a lot of answers directly without needing to speak to a human. We're going to be building automation when the merchant facing is live, because we'll be able to connect the merchant Zingtree directly to the agent Zingtree to see, okay, what steps has this merchant already taken? We'll know exactly who they are, exactly what steps they've already taken. By the time we speak to the merchant, we need to, on chat, for example, we'll be able to say, hi, Italian restaurant, I see you're trying to answer a question about an invoice. And so you're kind of opening the conversation. The merchant doesn't need to repeat themselves. You don't need to basically repeat the FAQ. So I think the feedback so far is positive, but we haven't unlocked the true potential, and we won't do until the merchant facing is live, because that's where you truly see the Zingtree potential to be unlocked. I think it's a brilliant agent-facing decision tree, but if you can put that in front of merchant, that's where the true potential is. That's where it will really be a game changer. Because historically with Groupon, we've never really had a merchant self-service ecosystem on the support side. So we do have self-service, like you can build a Groupon deal. So there is self-service, but it's very much geared towards the commercial relationship. On the support side, it's been, you have your FAQs, but you generally will need to speak to somebody if you want a question answering, or you have a problem that needs solving. And that's what we're going to kind of leapfrog away from FAQs into this self-service ecosystem. We use Zendesk for our customers and Salesforce for our merchants. We used to use both. So we finished the transition. Historically, you would have escalations from customers would go to Zendesk, but then the team handling those escalations would also work in Salesforce. It's very messy. So now escalations go from customers in Zendesk to Salesforce, where our merchant operations team help them. I definitely see a future where we kind of integrate Zendesk into Zingtree as well. Again, it's not just the decision tree tool that was built bespoke. There's a lot of other tools we have that are built bespoke at Groupon that could probably be updated or replaced with Zingtree or other providers. So we use Salesforce because it's used by everybody apart from customer service. So Zendesk is a very customer-specific tool, but for the rest of Groupon, we use Salesforce. And it creates that easy being able to reassign cases, tasks. Everybody has visibility into what's happening. If you want to look at anything that's happening with a merchant, you can just go into Salesforce. If you're in sales, if you're in merchant ops, you can see that full experience within Salesforce. I think the biggest potential with Zingtree is that it should be used across organizations. It should be used at scale. It shouldn't be something that's seen as there's something for customer service agents or merchant operations agents. I think that the potential that it can unlock in a business, if everybody can access every purchasing policy directly, is massive, because it's, very often sales reps, for example, probably don't know the intricacies of exactly how the support organization works and vice versa. And it's very difficult to train people on that, and the information you give them is immediately out of date. So to have a tool that's live, it's interactive, it's always up to date, that can be used by people across the business. I mean, there's very few tools, I think, that can be implemented that can have as positive an impact as Zingtree. Most of the tools tend to be restricted to one function within an organization, and there's not many that have the ability to be expanded everywhere. So I think just try it. I think try it and you'll soon see the potential, no matter how big or small the team is to kind of start the pilot with. You'll see the benefits, and then you'll quickly want to scale that up. I mean, just the fact that you don't need to pay for engineers, huge saving. Engineers aren't cheap. So even if if you're replacing an in-house tool, even if your productivity is static, you're saving on the engineering resource. And I think for the self-service, we're aiming for over 50% to be handled by self-service, but you don't need to be that aggressive to see benefits. You can save 10% of your workload. That's 10% of staffing costs you can spend elsewhere. So it's very easy to make Zingtree pay for itself.